Let me give you an intro about Jackie. So she's from Uniswap Foundation. She leads data science there, and she's going to talk about Uniswap V4 data, how to navigate it, and how to build analytics. So I'm excited about the event, and let me hand over it to you, Jackie.
Thank you, Manu. Thanks for having me today. Thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Brian. So today, very excited to go over how do we navigate Uniswap v4 data landscape. So for the agenda, I guess I can also share this so that if you want to follow along, feel free to. I feel like when I was on the other side of like watching presentation, I always wanted to like follow the presentation. So okay, cool. So this is the agenda for today. We'll start with talking about how is Uniswap v4 different from the previous version, and this will be from like more of a data landscape. And then we'll go over the Uniswap v4 metrics. So we want to establish some terminologies and methodologies, so we have the same framework and language to start talking about metrics when we're like crunching the numbers later on. And then we'll go into establishing hook data standards. By this point, you would have like a better idea of why hook data standards is like so important in the V4 landscape. And lastly, I will share a few resources on like if you want to have V4 related data, where can you go look? Yeah. So, my name's Jackie. I am currently doing data for Uniswap Foundation. I'm the resident data wizard for Uniswap Foundation. I used to work at Dune as wizard relations, and that is actually my official contract title. And then before that, I was like in the TradFi world, and then I pretty much got won over by crypto because I love like Web3 data so much. It's just like so open and composable, and everybody like it's so nice. It's just like really nice to like build data stuff together in Web3. And then if you want to find me, Agaperstate is my handle, both on Twitter and on Telegram. So feel free to find me. Also feel free to like unmute yourself, type things in the chat. I'm trying to monitor the chat as well. Wanted this to be like interactive. If you have questions, like feel free to just like shout. Okay, so how is Uniswap v4 different than previous version? Um, from a data point of view, I think two important like keywords. One is singleton and one is hooks. So if you were crunching data for previous Uniswap versions, you notice that the structure of Uniswap is basically you have one factory contract, which then can create like as many different pools as possible. So each of the pool actually has their own existing actual contracts. And then when you do like swaps and like multi-hop swaps, like the token actually transfer from like one pool to another. So in the V4 landscape, it is a singleton contract, meaning that like all the pools actually like live within this contract, and then it will create implications for data analysis later on that we can go into, but it's just like important to kind of like visualize. For example, like the ETH USDC pool or like the Fluff Flunchy pool. Although there are different pairs, but for when we like crunch data and think about like token flows or like different flows, like they all live in the one V4 core contract, the pool manager contract, and everything goes from this one contract. So that's the singleton perspective. And for the hooks, so Uniswap v4, you probably like know at this point, introduces this concept of hooks, which are just like arbitrary solidity contract that kind of follow a standard and can kind of like interject different things during the life cycle of a swap. So for example, when you have an initialized hook like flunch, it can be like initialized, aka like attached to a particular pool, and then change the behavior of the swap life cycle based on like the functions that it calls. So that's sort of like the rough like I guess like 1000 level 1,000 meter view of like Uniswap v4. It is a singleton contract that has all the pools. Everything happens within this contract instead of like many contract that's being created by the factory in the past versions. And then the introduction of hooks. Hooks now exist as sort of like external APIs that the pools within the singleton contract can just like call and access auxiliary like functionalities. Okay, cool. With that in mind, let's go into some specific scenarios of how like the singleton hooks like change things. Okay, so because of the singleton design of like all pools, all balances living within one contract, so in pool creation, in V2 and V3, as I was alluding to earlier, you have like this contract that's creating like the pools for you, right? So it's like called factory in V2, called Uniswap V3 factory in V3. And then the way for data people, you can watch, there's like the pair created and pool created events that's being emitted by these two factory contracts. And then it will tell you like what are the token addresses of the pair, like the pool that's being created. And then for V3 specifically, because V3 introduced the fee tier, even though it's like set fee tier, you can then also watch for the fee being charged upon swapping for each of the pools. So that's for previous versions. So in V4, because there's only one contract, so the pool manager contract actually will emit this initialize event, which will tell you the pool ID as well as the token addresses, which are called currency here. And then it will also tell you the fee being set by this particular pool. And it will tell you whether or not the pool is initialized with a hook or not. So if it is initialized with a hook, then it will emit a non-zero, like a non-null hook address. And then we will talk more about it a bit later, actually. Another thing I want to say is this pool ID, although it looks like a real address, it will like look like 0x ABCD. It's not accessible like on Etherscan because it's virtual, because it doesn't exist. Like the only thing that exists for real is this pool manager contract address. So it's like more like a virtual ID that we have to help us identify what pool it is. And this will create implications for later on for like TVL calculation, for example. We can touch into that a bit later. Okay, so that's upon pool creation, how V4 is different. Moving on to the swapping. So in previous versions, in V2 and V3, you have the swap event being emitted by each of the pair or the pool that's being created. So you need to like track basically thousands of contract that is being created by the factory contracts and like track the event being emitted. But it's actually like a lot of like platforms have already solved the problem, so it's not really like a problem anymore. And then with these swap events, you will basically get like the amounts that's being swapped. So in V4, it's very similar with the difference being the swap is also now being emitted by the pool manager because there's only one contract. And it will tell you like which pool by the ID has swapped like whatever amounts. And then a thing that happens with V4's swap events is it actually will tell you the fee percent or hundreds and bips percent like unit being charged. That is related to in V4. The fee are being set like very flexibly. So sometimes with dynamic fee pools, the fees are dynamic. So the swap events will actually tell you how the fee like, dynamically changes upon each swap, which is nice to have. But the not nice thing of the Uniswap V4's swap event is that it's actually sort of incomplete. And this is because the introduction of hooks. So when you have like special hooks, for example, like Bunny right now, it's a custom curve hook. And then when Bunny has like as a hook gets attached to just an example, I don't know if it actually exists, like USDC ETH pool, it's actually bypassing the swap event of the pool manager contract. So that means that the swap events, these like amount 0 and amount 1 being emitted, is going to be zero, so it's going to be like inaccurate. So in that case, we will actually have to use the swap call traces because the swap call forces the hook contract to return like a return delta variable for us to like then accurately capture the amounts that's being swapped. So that's like the caveat that I want to say about the swap event for V4. So for like volume tracking purposes, you can no longer just watch for the swap events. If your goal is to either track the entire holistic V4 volume or to track volume for these like special hooked pools. But like if you just care about like vanilla pools, that is okay. And then if you're like, okay, what is vanilla pool? What is like hooked pools? What are like special hooked pools? We'll get into that in the terminology like metrics section a bit more. Cool. Moving on to the liquidity modification, TVL, and fee side of things. Um, so the pool manager will actually emit a one modified liquidity event instead of like previously. Like for example, for V3, you have like I think you have like a mint and you have burn and you have like increased liquidity, decreased liquidity, and all these actions are actually just like consolidated in one event. Um, but similar to how volume can be problematic when it comes to these custom curve hooked pools, the liquidity can be problematic because the hooks can provision the liquidity on their own um, and will bypass the modified liquidity event completely. So you won't be able to see the event being emitted. Um, so that's something like to keep in mind when you like start constructing like logic queries for your use case. And another thing to know is related to singleton, right? Because before the singleton pattern, if you just want to know like a pool for a particular pool, like what is the current TVL? There's different ways, but one of the easier ways is you can track the ERC20 token inflow and outflow and net it, and then get the current TVL. But with V4, it's like not possible because the token flow like all happens within one single contract, right? So you need event to actually help you start tracking what is happening with like a particular pool. So that's why like if you need to know the per pool level TVL, you have to watch for the event being emitted by the pool manager. So that's something to know. And then if you need to do like TVL, like any liquidity calculation on pool level, this might create a problem, like a headache for you. So that's something to flag. Okay, so on the fee specifically, so V2 doesn't have a fee, right? V3 has like a set of 5 or 6 feature that comes pre-built. And then with V4, there's 2 types of fees that you can like specify. So you can specify a static fee during the pool initialize stage, and then you can do whatever you want. There's no limitation as long as like as the math it like works. And then whatever you set is a static fee that will be charged during the swapping stage for to the swappers. However, it is also possible to have dynamic fee tier based on sort of logic. So if you like want your fee logic to, I don't know, go with like the moon waning and waxing as a silly example. Like it's possible. You just like write that function into the hook, and then you can get that. And then during the pool initialize stage, how you will know that the pool is a dynamic fee tiered pool is that you can watch the fee column from emitted by the initialized event. It will look like this number, this 8388 like number. It's like an invalid number in Solidity, signaling to you, hey, like this is actually a dynamic fee pool. And then which is why like going back to kind of like our swap event, in most cases, you can actually watch for this fee emitted on a per swap level to get like the most accurate fee tier being charged for swap. Okay, okay, cool. So that is on the implication of different aspects of V4 data introduced by the singleton pattern and hooks. I will go into the hooks a little bit more now. to further tell like what sort of like analysis or like data things that you can do with hooks. Okay, to start, I sort of borrowed the slide from our protocol engineer Sauce on how he introduced like what hooks are. So hooks are just liquidity, yes, liquidity, solidity contracts to customize the swap lifecycle. And as long as the solidity code is valid, like anything goes, right? So what can hook do? So hook can restrict pool creation during the pool creation stage, and hook can also like help you set dynamic fee tier, like we were just talking about. And then hooks can also provision liquidity on its own, bypassing like liquidity provisioning modification, things that happens within the V4 pool manager. But also it can like do things like penalize short duration liquidity. So like it can penalize like JIT as a use case. And then for the swap itself, there's many use cases that hooks can help you do. It can like try to rebalance liquidity, set the swap fees, have gated access, etc., etc. Not talking about this for today from like a depth perspective, but I just wanted to go over these. I was like at a high level to like sort of like let us visualize like what are the things that hook can do so that we can like start understanding like how it impact the data side of things. Okay, so sorry. Okay, so because hooks can attach additional logic to the swap lifecycle, things that we should be aware of. I already sort of gone over how you can identify a pool is hooked or vanilla. That is during the pool creation stage, like the initialized event will tell you whether or not it's hooked with a hook. Another very cool things that the you can tell by monitoring the hook address is the last 2 bytes of any hook address. You can decode that and get the 14 hook flags. So this picture is an example of what the hook flags can look like for a particular contract. So each of these 14 bits will correspond to like a yes or no on like the flag, like on whether or not like a certain behavior for the pool is being modified. So here we have like before add liquidity turned on, we have before swap turned on, and we have before swap return delta turned on. So then we will know, hey, this hook actually modified behavior for before liquidity is added and modifies behavior for before a swap is conducted. And associated with the before swap, it actually will return a return delta from the hook to the pool manager to tell the pool manager like what are the balances, basically like the swap amounts being conducted on the hook side for this particular pool. So it is something interesting that we can know and start doing analysis on. Okay, cool. That's sort of a overview of how Uniswap v4 is different than the previous versions and the implications of like different sides of data. I will do a quick pause before going on to the metric side of things. Okay, have a question in the chat. For those who build AA model, what is AA model?
Account abstraction, I think.
C'est vraiment généraliste. Nous, on a des avocats très Web3. On a une boîte, tu vois, qui aimerait pour.
Oh,
I say advanced analytics model and already have billions of records of Uniswap v3 data. Is there a document describing how to harmonize v3 and v4 data? Not really a document, but like lots of resources. And stuff. So I'm a heavy do user. So for volume, an example, the way that I've like sort of worked with do models is basically we have this like DEXA trades model, which index all the swap that happens for all the AMM actually for that purpose. So you can directly query DEXA trades on Dune already and get all the swap volume correctly that way. I will at the end I like there's resources I will link to you to do it. So actually, this session is actually, yeah, this is a really good question because this section is to help so that we can have like a shared framework so everybody can index V3, V4. And like for the matter, like any other AMM in like a very standardized as possible framework so that like it's not just like V4 data, right? Because you want to compare V4 data with like V3 data with like fluid data, for example. So, okay, cool. Moving on to the metric side of things. So in this section, we'll go over a couple terminologies. Because the introduction of Hook, things are no longer as, I guess, known of like a vocabulary as before. And then we can also like start touching on like methodology and how you grab these metrics. Okay, cool. Already started mentioning the volume side of things. So this is a picture illustrating total V4 volume. So what is the total V4 volume? The total V4 volume is a combination of the vanilla volume and the hooked volume, right? So if you ask, what is the vanilla volume? The vanilla volume is the volume being conducted by the vanilla pools within the V4 singleton contract. So using like sort of like the same picture we had before. So these like blue poles are the non-hooked vanilla poles. So they just are standalone poles. No, nothing super special. They're not like this other pole, you know, hooked with bunny or this pole that's hooked with flunch. They're just themselves. So when we talk about like vanilla volume, we just mean that volume that's like flown through these vanilla pools. And when we talk about hooked volume, it's like the opposite, right? So these hooked volume are the volume that's flown through hooked pools. So the hooked pools are just like these pink boxed pools that are initialized with hooks. So when you think about the holistic or the total V4 volume, it's a combination of everything within the pool manager. So it's both the vanilla volume and the hooked volume. And then practically speaking, if you are interested to track on a pool level volume, because that's a question that like a lot of people would ask, what you need to do is just like single out the volume by the virtual pool ID. And then if you need to track the volume flowing through a particular initialized hook, you can just like filter by the hook. And then the way you can connect the hook with the swap is through the initialize event, right? Because if you remember in the initialize event, it will have a column called hooks for each of the pool. So that's how you can connect the hooked pool volume with like the pool volume calculation as a whole. It's a bit abstract. I have like some guide on this and with like example queries. I'll link it at the end as well. So if you like do need to do this, I have some example queries that you can like see without like kind of like abstractly thinking about how to actually do that. Okay, so that is on the volume side of things. And then moving on to the TVL side of things. So the overall V4 TVL, sort of similar to the volume. It's actually like two parts. It's like the TVL, like the liquidity that's being locked in the singleton pool manager contract, as well as the external TVL, that's like locked in the hooks. Because if you remember, for special hooks like custom curve hooks, they can and they will provision liquidity on the hooks itself, which means that there is a possibility that the liquidity will like sit outside of the pool manager. So when you consider the TVL, like it's important to make it whole and think about both sides. Yeah, so the singleton is easy. It's just like whatever is actually like sitting on the pool manager contract itself. External, pretty easy too. It's like whatever that's sitting outside. The complication actually comes in on special hooks. So we have use cases where you have like rehypothecated hooks, right? Where for Bunny, for example, the LPs can deposit liquidity through Bunny into a V4 hooked pool. But Bunny will actually take up to 90% of the liquidity that's sitting in the pool and like send it over to a lending pool to just like rehypothecate, get more yield. And in that case, the token is no longer sitting in the hook itself, nor in like obviously also not in the singleton. So like how do you track that? How do you think about that? That is like an active conversation we're having right now. And even more complicated than the rehypothecated hooks is the JIT hooks. Because JIT hooks, you basically, it's like upon swapping, you can start like grab liquidity from something like Euler. So it's like borrowed liquidity upon the time of swapping. So obviously it also does not sit or get locked into any of the hook contracts nor the V4 core contract. So like what do you do for those use cases? So it's sort of like a question we're exploring together with the hook team right now. Cool. I saw some chat questions. Let me go over those. Okay, so somebody's asking, I want to do a back testing for my MEV protection hook, getting all the events from Uni v3 and applying them to my hooked pool. Any tools you can suggest? For now, I invent a wheel with graph and unveil. Okay. I there okay, so I guess two things. I think it's being talked about so much. Let me just like jump ahead to that slide right now. So if you're like more from an analytics perspective, if you're like super familiar with like SQL, you can already go to Dune and LEM. And for especially volume side of things, the models that they have, DEXA trades is like pretty, it's accurate. It will like be good for hooked pools and like in previous versions of like V2, V3 as well. For liquidity metrics though, it's a little tricky because we haven't really like figured out what to count for TVL yet. So just depends on like when you do like my protected hook, like what is like impacted, I guess. And then with custom curve hook impact, I would say just like watch out because the liquidity management situation is like really messy. So yeah, that's on that. So if you are more familiar with like GraphQL style and then want to sort of like go that route, there's the V4 subgraph. And then there's like the MVO v4 indexer. And if you are interested, so Tycho is more of like, they're more tailored towards like routers and solvers. And then I guess the pro of Tycho is they do like custom integration with protocols, which means that for hooked pools, like for hooked protocols like Bunny, they actually do things like correctly for the purpose of like, okay, what happens at the time of swap? So like, do check it out. I have the doc linked here. And then for these MVO and V4, the pro of them, it's like a lot of it is already written, so you can like already use it. But the con is like they don't necessarily deal with the custom curve like TVL side of things super correctly right now because of the complications of like rehypothecation and JIT that I was mentioning. Cool. So hopefully that helps. I also saw chats like giving various resources as well. Thank you, chat. Okay, cool. Moving back to covering hook standards. Okay, so hopefully by this point you sort of like have an inkling of why it's so important to establish hook standards. Because the introduction of hooks to the V4 contract, it makes things really flexible, but at the same time, like really, really messes up things for data side of data collection, like analysis. So if you currently like the the hooks that we like all know, like funny. We need to do like custom logic to start understanding like what is happening for the fees they're charging, like what is happening for the liquidity that's sitting. But in a future world, hopefully where hooks are flourishing, like hooked pools are flourishing, it's sort of like impractical, right? Like you can't just like custom do all the metrics for all thousands, tens of thousands of like hooks that are out there. Okay, so because of this, we sat down and proposed a set of events for hook developers to emit, so that it's much easier for the data side of things to do event capturing and to start doing analytics with hooks and hooked pools. So I'll go over the event being proposed, and then I can go through sort of like the flow and time point that you can inject these events. Okay, so for the first one is on the hook swap. So the hook swap event, you should emit it when when as a hook you're trying to facilitate some sort of like swap. You need to emit the amounts being swapped, as well as the LP fees that's being charged. So this LP fee is different than the hook fee. So if as a hook you want to charge for the service you're providing, then you should like you should emit the amounts being charged in the hook fee event instead of in the hook swap. So in the hook swap, it's the LP fee, and then in the hook fee event, it's the like the hook fee that you're trying to charge. That is not the LP fee. Okay, cool. So then the third one is the hook modified liquidity. If you remember, the custom curve, so the hooks that will provision liquidity on its own will literally like bypass all the events that's happening in V4, right? So we introduced this hook modified liquidity event structure so that everybody can like go and understand in a standardized way how the liquidity is being modified for that particular hook for a particular pool. So that is the hook modified liquidity event. And lastly, the opposite of taking a hook fee, you can give a hook bonus. I don't think anybody's like really doing this yet now, but in case you're doing it, please emit the amounts that is being given as a bonus to the user and the associated pool ID that it's being given to. So those are the 4 hook events that we are proposing. And we already are actively working with like Open Zeppelin to adopt these events into the hook-based templates. So like from a developer point of view, it's like also easier to adopt. Because the adoption is always like the hardest part, right? Like it's like you can introduce all these ERCs, but like the adoption is kind of like the harder, like the slower part. Okay, cool. So then with these hook events proposed in head, we can sort of like go through a few flows of like when these events can be emitted by the developers. So if the hook is a custom curve hook, then it will emit, or it should emit the hook swap event in the before swap function that it's implementing. It can actually be like after swap if it so be that way, but it just like usually is before swap. And then during the liquidity modification stage, wherever they do that, they should also emit a hook modified liquidity. So that way you can see the volume and the LP fee being charged, and then you can also sort of like understand the liquidity changes for this hook and for the pools associated with this hook. So that's on the custom curve side. And then another use case is on the async swap side. And the async swap, like the special use case is actually an async swap that is also a custom curve. And then in those situations, basically you emit the same 2 events. You have the hook swap events and then you have the hook modified liquidity events for the same purpose that we just went over. And then for the hook fees, because as a hook, you can decide to charge a service fee, right? For people who are using your hook to swap. Or if you just like sort of want to, for example, penalize just-in-time liquidity, you can also charge a fee on liquidity. Same thing as async swap. The problem only comes sorry. Let me take that. Similar to async swap, custom curves will have a slightly different route than the regular swaps. But in either scenario, if you're charging a fee on swap, you should emit the hook fee event. And as data people, if you watch this event, then you will be able to collect and kind of like aggregate and see how much service fee has been charged or taken by this particular hook or this particular hooked pool. And similarly for the liquidity, they should be emitting the hook fee for liquidity modification events. And in those scenarios, as data people, we can then go track for the hook fee that's being charged and then conduct our analysis. And last but not least, we have the hook bonus situation. And yeah, if you're like a hook bonus hook, just emit events. So you can tell us, they should be emitting these events to tell us, hey, this is bonus amount 0 being given, bonus amount 1 being given. And in those cases, it's important for data people to know, because then the data people can go adjust for the swap volume, right? Because it's artificially adding the volume to the calculation that it already exists in our system. Okay, so that's on the hook standard of things. Lastly, it's just the resources that I've compiled. So we have put out 2 guides on UniV4 data related things. I already talked about like as a more like analyst SQL angle, you can go do an LEM as more like a dev GraphQL, like that angle or router angle. You could go to the subgraph made by the Uniswap Labs. You can go to the V4 indexer made by NVO, and then you can go to the indexer made by Tycho. And then upcoming, we will have the hook template. We'll have the hook event being built in the Open Zeppelin template. So that way you can sort of like see how the developers are actually like adopting these standards. And lastly, a little plug. We have this Telegram chat, v4_hooks_data. There's already like a bunch of people there just talking about like hook data. So join this chat and then get your questions answered and like start jamming data related things with each other on V4. Okay, that is it for the presentation. I will go over the chat a little bit. Okay, someone asked, what if I rebate users on part of the fee previously was being collected? In my case, fee is collected from attacker and rebated to victim. Should I emit anything? What if I rebate users some part of the fee previously being collected? In my case, fee is collected from attacker and rebated to the victim. I guess just help me understand, like, do you mean like MEV? Like the users are being sandwiched and then you're trying to, okay, cool. Let's see. So if just a MEV protection fee, let's connect async, but my current thinking aloud answer is no. Because for the volume, it's actually correct. The amounts being swapped will be correctly emitted by the contract, so you should be fine. And then like you're not like taking a fee as a service fee either, so it doesn't apply for like the hook fee situation either. But I think I would want to, yeah, like take a look, like walk through with you like the actual use case and see if I'm not like missing anything. Okay, another question. Is there a way to filter on events related to a specific pool and hook? Yes. The way you can filter for a pool is through the ID, and the ID will exist for like both the initialize event and the swap events. And in the proposed like hook event standard, you can see that you can also they should be also emitting the ID, so you can filter for the pool that way. The hook is the extra step that I was talking about earlier, because the hook information is being emitted within the pool initialized stage, right? So whenever a pool gets initialized, the event will also emit a hook. So whatever metric events that you're doing, you need to join that back with the pool creation, like this initialized event, and grab that hook associated with it. Hopefully that makes sense. I have some like example queries like also linked in the guide. You can also DM me. I'll send you the query. How do you efficiently query time-weighted average price in V4 given the new architecture? Wow, boy, this is a big question. How do you efficiently query time-weighted average prices in V4 given the new architecture? I think I need to take this async with you because I feel like I need to think through a lot on like 12s, like previously, how do we do it? And currently, but like happy to chat with you either in the Telegram like group chat, or like if you want to DM me individually, happy to work with you on this. Okay, next question. Also love the profile picture. Josu. The foundation trying to make sure when they activate fees on hooks, it's easier since all data are the same. I think the primary motivation, so a bit more story, I joined the foundation in December. And a lot of like obviously the code is already frozen. And the primary motivation of me and like my teammates kind of like pursuing after the data standard, it isn't actually related to the fee. It's more like, okay, given V4 introduces so much freedom and therefore complexity for data, like how do we actually service the community, like guide the community through data analytics? Because as you can see, like even as simple as volume, like it took us a while to figure out, and then now we're in the process of figuring out like TBL situation. And then I'm sure like with use cases, like people are talking about like, okay, Mev hooks, what do you think? Or like top price, like what do you think? Like things like this are just like so complicated, and it's way better if as a community we figure out together and share the knowledge, rather than like one team like spending all the time and resource like trying to figure it out, but then like nobody else knows, and then like someone else has to like literally redo the same thing again. But yeah, that's my soapbox, off my soapbox now. Cool. Anything else before we close today's session?
Yeah. Please drop any questions if you have. I think there were a couple of people dropping their analytics tool in the chat too, so love to see that.
Nice.
Yeah, let me also drop Jackie's Twitter, so go follow Jackie. Follow her,
Yay.
like her, suppose. All right. I think we can close now. So for the record, for people who joined late, we'll upload this session to YouTube. Check out Atrium Academy YouTube channel, and we'll upload all of this there. So yeah, thank you, Jackie, for doing this session. Thank you for sharing the insights on Hook data. Amazing to see this. And thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
guys.
Have a
See
good
you.
one. Bye.
Bye-bye.